So, with all the fake products and copycats coming out of China, it just begs the question, are intellectual property rights actually a thing in China? Actually, intellectual property rights are totally a thing in China. Yeah, still a thing. Still a thing. Still a thing. So it turns out they are definitely a thing in China, but with some caveats. So while China's been making leaps and strides in most aspects of its economy for the last few years, copycats, brand ripoffs, fake products, and an apparent disregard for intellectual property rights are still the image that a lot of people have of China. So what's going on here? First off, I'd like to make the disclaimer that I am not a lawyer, I don't study law, and I have no authority when it comes to anything involving law whatsoever.
Beautiful, you're hired.
That being said, what I do have is some experience living in China. I am fluent in Chinese with an HSK 6. I did my master's here, and in the process of doing my master's, while I experienced a few things in China, I also learned how to do thorough research. But in either case, I'll keep my sources down in the description for everybody's scrutiny. What I found is that law-wise, copycatting and making fake products and ripping off brand names and designs and trademarks and everything, copyright, there's nothing to suggest that that is okay in any way. Although China's legal framework for intellectual property rights is fairly new, it was developed somewhat recently, especially when you compare that to the US, for example. It actually already had fairly similar laws to the US, as far as I can tell, by the time it entered into the WTO in 2001. And they've only been making more and more progress since then. So then, what is the problem here? Well, depending on who you ask, you could get a different answer. According to some interviews done with a Xinhua journalist in 2017, professors from various legal academies all throughout China cited that the main issues actually weren't related to the legal framework itself. Obviously, there's always work to be done, you can always do better, but the problems that they cited were more about how people weren't actually used to using that legal framework and depending on these laws to get anything done or protecting their intellectual property. And because a complaint needs to get filed before the laws can be enforced, the government ends up just not seeing a lot of the problems because they don't get those complaints because people aren't used to using that legal framework. That's also not as much of a priority for the Chinese government right now, so it's not improving as fast as some people would like. And then this leads to other problems. Because people aren't used to taking advantage of intellectual property rights, there won't be as many funds going into protecting them. And there also won't be as many people specializing in that field because you won't find as much work, because nobody's looking for those kinds of lawyers, and so on and so forth. That situation is better in first-class cities in China, so some of the bigger cities like Shanghai and Beijing, but it gets worse pretty quickly once you get out of those areas. I remember when I went to a place called Fuyang in Anhui province, and that is a third-tier city, so it is fairly low on the list, although it's still a city. I remember how surprising it was for me when my friend and I walked into a big shopping mall in the middle of the city. So on the like 5th floor or something, there were a ton of different shoe stores. I kid you not, maybe 1 out of 20 was a legitimate brand, as far as I could tell. So that could mean that it was a good fake or whatever. But there were, I don't know how many different kinds of fake New Balances. I don't know how many different kinds of like Nikes there were. Like it was crazy. That was a 3rd-tier city. But even in the 1st-tier cities, it won't mean much if the thing that you're looking for is sold online. Even just a brief search will yield a whole bunch of results on tips on how to find the best fake products. For a lot of people, it's still a booming business. I remember when I first got to the school I did my master's at, and the first person I talked to was a former student. He was really proud and excited to tell me about this translation that he published, an entire book. He pulled it up online. The first result that he found was a pirated version. Another problem that's been mentioned is that intellectual property rights may not transfer over from different countries. At least in China, if you didn't apply for a patent in China, if you didn't apply for a copyright in China, if you didn't apply for a trademark in China, then you probably don't have that in China. So I read some stories online about a few different companies who were really upset that they had copycat products in China, and then turns out they didn't actually apply for the patent. So that's another problem. In either case though, it is getting better. Centers for protection of intellectual property rights have been springing up basically everywhere over China. The government has been saying that they're really trying to improve that area of the law and the executive systems in China. And more people want that in our more and more globalized economy. Although the fact still remains that there are a lot of fake products. They're almost easier and easier to get, seemingly. I even bought a pair of fake AirPods for almost a tenth of the price of the real ones a few years ago. You may have even seen some of your favorite tech YouTubers buying some fake Apple products off of AliExpress and then testing them against the real thing to see, you know, how good of fakes they are. But anyway, I personally would like to give China and the Chinese people benefit of the doubt. I think they are trying to improve that for the most part, and hopefully we will be seeing fewer and fewer fake products. Although, I would like to keep these. So, now we know that intellectual property rights are a thing in China.